Let's talk about offshore banking that lawsuits can't touch. I'm calling this the ultimate asset protection strategy. Now picture this is Friday at 4 p.m. You just landed in Maui. You finally silenced your phone and then buzz, your attorney texts you, you've been served. They're freezing your accounts on Monday. Now, if your money is parked in London, Toronto, or Sydney, a U.S. judge can yank it back faster than you can order a Mai Tai. But if you parked in the right offshore vault, inside the right legal wrapper, that lawsuit hits a concrete wall. So today I'm revealing where those vaults are, why some popular countries collapse under pressure, and how to build an ironclad system that keeps what's yours, yours. So stick around, because in the next few minutes, you'll discover one bank jurisdiction that turns creditors into spectators. And no, it's not Switzerland. I'm the business guy, the CEO of the Lawyers Limited Law Firm and Asset Protection Planners. I've spent 34 years building fortress-level defenses for high net worth clients and have established more Cook Islands trusts than any firm in the world. And if you're serious about keeping what you've built, smash that subscribe button now if you haven't, and let's protect your assets together. So let's start with a myth I hear at every cocktail party in Palm Beach. Hey, I'll just open up a Swiss account and voila, lawsuit proof. Wrong. A plain offshore account is like hiding your Ferrari behind a chain link fence. A U.S. court can order you to sign a repatriation form, refuse, and you're held in contempt. Think orange jumpsuit, not orange juice. And here's a stat for you. In the Kent contempt cases of 2019, U.S. judges jailed debtors for an average of 232 days until they wired funds back. The money was abroad, but the owners were not, so no trust, no shield. Here's an example. Think of a foreign account like leaving a safe full of cash in somebody else's living room, but still keeping the combination in your pocket. If the cops show up with a warrant, they grab both you and the safe. The location didn't matter because the legal control did. Okay, now for a definition break. Repatriation order, a court instruction compelling you to bring foreign assets back into the court jurisdiction and violating a civil contempt, punishable by daily fines or jail until you comply. Now, contempt of court is not like contempt of kale court. You don't eventually give up because you grimace enough. Now, let's talk about the anatomy of impenetrable structure. The Cook Islands Trust with an international LLC. In fact, I've set up these structures for nearly 30 years. Actually, let's spend 4 minutes and do it justice. Now, the Cook Islands, which is the vault, the Cook Islands are 5,000 miles and one entire legal universe away from the United States. So their International Trust Act says that U.S. civil judgments are void and must start over in the city of Rarotonga, prepay a huge bond, and prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The Cook Islands LLC, which is the lockbox. The trust owns 100% of a Cook Islands limited liability company. You're the initial manager while the seas are calm, wiring funds, trading stocks, paying for your kids' Stanford education, and so on. Next, the licensed bonded trustee company, which is the gatekeeper, which is our affiliated trustee company law firm, bonded and regulated, and they only step in when the storm hits, that is when you need them to. Now, because they're outside of your court's jurisdiction, they can refuse repatriation orders from foreign courts because the Cook Islands law literally forbids compliance with them. Next, offshore bank account, which is the cash vault, which we'll rank in a moment. Ideally, one with rock-solid privacy and zero record of caving into U.S. pressure. Here's an analogy. Think of it like a Tesla with the Sentry mode. You drive it every day, but the second somebody smashes a window, the car locks down, the cameras roll, except here, the car is a multi-layered legal entity on the other side of the planet. Here's some legal trivia. Under Section 13B of the Cook Islands International Trust Act, a plaintiff must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the trust was set up to defraud them specifically, and they must file suit within 2 years of the transfer. Now compare that to Nevada's 2-year statute of limitations, shorter if you publish, and a mere preponderance of the evidence standard. Now, here's some real-world numbers for you. Our average client spends $26,000 on the Trust Plus LLC package, more if there's real estate and they need extra structures. The cheapest lawsuit that we've seen lately demanded $750,000. So think about it. Return on protection, about 2,785%. Okay, it's story time. A real estate mogul we helped in 2023 had 14 apartment buildings leveraged to the hilt with the equity stripping strategies that we had employed. So when a tenant's injury lawyer demanded $12 million, the trust locked the assets. The LLC manager, which is him, resigned only temporarily when he needed to, and the plaintiff settled for $370,000 paid by insurance, not his personal fortune. Okay, now for the good stuff. I'll expose the first world banking hotspot that Americans love, but that hands cash over at the snap of a subpoena. But first, let's understand how I grade banking jurisdictions. Here's the 5-factor safety test for offshore banking. Now, when I evaluate banks for my clients' trusts and LLCs, I use a checklist. In fact, it would make your CPA sweat bullets. Now, here's the factor and why it matters. Danger signs, sovereign independence. That is, will the court ignore or relitigate U.S. judgments? And it's a danger sign if they have an automatic reciprocity statute. Next, political stability and GDP per capita. Stable democracies defend bank secrecy longer. Sudden regime changes, currency controls, bank capitalization. Higher Tier 1 capital means fewer bank bail-ins. So we look for ratios under 10%. Next, confidentiality statutes. Is unauthorized disclosure a crime like it is in Switzerland? Do they have banker's duty clauses with broad exceptions? Next, extradition pressure. Will regulators cave in to political phone calls? We also look at history of compliance with U.S. subpoenas. Here's a mini case study. In 2021, Lebanon's banking sector froze dollar withdrawals overnight. Political stability score in Lebanon, F-. In fact, a single tweet from a protester shut down the ATM networks. So that's why we keep clients away from jurisdictions where a minister's bad hair day can freeze liquidity. Okay, now for the super good stuff. The top 4 jurisdictions for asset protection when it comes to banking. First up, Switzerland, the veteran sniper. Swiss courts require a domestic lawsuit. In fact, U.S. civil judgments die on the tarmac in Zurich. Bank strength, the average Tier 1 capital is 18%. In fact, the biggest bank in Switzerland now holds more capital than most U.S. regional banks. Privacy. Article 47 of the Swiss Banking Act makes unauthorized disclosure a felony. In fact, penalties include jail time and 5-figure fines. Here's what some may call a drawback. We just call it compliance. Tax cases are a different story. We comply fully with FATCA. We're protecting from lawsuits, not the IRS. Now, we often use Swiss banks for brokerage portfolios and trading accounts. So in other words, the banks allow for U.S. tax reporting, yet they refuse to enforce U.S. civil garnishments. Here's kind of a cultural note. Swiss banking secrets date back to 1934 when politicians fleeing Nazi Germany needed a discreet place to park their assets. So 8 decades later, the statute still packs teeth. Here's a real-world story. A 2022 Miami cardiologist lost a $12 million malpractice suit. His Swiss-held Cook Islands' own brokerage account stayed untouched because the plaintiff's attorney couldn't afford to restart litigation. I mean, fighting a lawsuit overseas is expensive. Second up, Liechtenstein. This is one of my favorites as well. The armored microstate independence. Now, it uses its own civil law code, no mutual enforcement of U.S. money judgments. Capitalization? Banks maintain some of the highest liquidity ratios in Europe. Here's a fun fact. Liechtenstein's prince abolished his income tax in 2010. Number 3, Dubai, which is in the UAE. The desert fortress, let's call it. Legal system, separate English language, DIFC courts. Foreign civil judgments require a new lawsuit in Dubai. Stability. The royal family views bank privacy as a competitive advantage. Capitalization. The Emirates hold some of the highest liquidity buffers. Business vibe. Dubai treats American entrepreneurs the way Vegas treats bachelor parties. Red carpet and VIP service because they know people in the U.S. have the money. Regulation note, DIFC courts use a common law system separate from Sharia courts, making it familiar terrain for U.S. attorneys if disputes ever arise. Number 4, Singapore, the Asian vault. Rule of law is English common law heritage with strict statutory privacy. Bank help, the big banks hold over 14% Tier 1 capital. Enforcement, foreign money judgments can be registered but are still at the court's discretion. And the Cook Islands trust layer blocks direct reach. Here's a tech ad. Singapore's Moss mandates cyber resilience audits every 12 months. So that means there's less chance of a hacker emptying your account while you're sleeping. And here's a stat for you. Singapore now holds over 2.1 trillion in private banking assets, which is double Hong Kong's 2015 figure. But one thing I'll tell you on a personal note, it's very hard for a US person to open a bank account in Singapore, almost impossible if you don't live there. So that's a pretty important thing to know. Okay, next we'll talk about the paper tigers, England, Australia, and Canada. First up, England, including the Channel Islands. The UK is party to the Hague Choice of Court Conventions. Pair that with reciprocal enforcement statutes, and you've got a fast-track pipeline for U.S. plaintiffs. Your London banker will freeze the account before you can finish your afternoon tea. Australia, under the Foreign Judgments Act, once the paperwork is rubber-stamped, enforcement is as swift as a kangaroo on espresso. Canada, which is our polite neighbor to the north, as you know, U.S. judgments there are under common law comity. So provinces like Ontario skip straight to garnishment. So it's friendly for skiing, but it's unfriendly for asset protection. Here's historical proof. In Marsh versus Canada Life, an Arizona creditor registered a $4.2 million judgment in Ontario and seized their brokerage account within 14 days. In fact, the debtor thought foreign means safe. Spoiler, not when the country shares the same Netflix library. Here's the moral. If a country relies heavily on U.S. trade or shared the same monarch, expect legal cooperation. That's why we layer your funds in a trust that physically can't comply. Next, let's talk about why a trust beats a naked bank account. Now imagine a judge points to you and says, bring the money back in 72 hours or enjoy my luxury gray bar hotel. If you can comply, you must. That's contempt law 101. But inside of a Cook Islands trust, you're not the trustee. The trustee is outside of the U.S. jurisdiction. Cook Islands statutes forbids repatriating assets on foreign court orders. In fact, in the FTC versus Affordable Media case in 1999, a Las Vegas couple lost $37 million to an investment fraud claim. Their Cook Islands trustee ignored the U.S. court order. They got into hot water with the judge, but they kept their money. And they were still far richer than if the assets had to be repatriated. The trust stayed intact, and eventually the plaintiffs accepted a fraction and then walked away. Here's a statutory comparison. Cook Islands, 0 recognition of foreign judgments. Belize, 0 fraudulent transfer time. Cayman Islands, however, a 6-year waiting period before the trust defends the assets. That 6-year gap is generally why Cayman's is not on our podium today. Okay, let's talk about your action plan, what you can do now. First of all, book the call. Feel free to visit assetprotectionplanners.com. There's a lot of free information there. Next, we tailor the trust. We draft clauses for real estate, brokerage, crypto, that vintage Ferrari collection. Next, we form the Cook Islands Trust that goes into the LLC. Typically a quick turnaround. You remain the manager while legal sees are calm. So think of it as your offshore account with a bulletproof glass. Next step, select the banking jurisdiction. Switzerland for conservative wealth, Liechtenstein for dynastic funds, Dubai for operating companies, Singapore for high-tech investors, if we can get an account open there at all. Okay, next, fund it smartly. We use wire transfers when it's offshore. We don't use personal checks offshore. Keep a clean audit trail for taxes. Here's the maintenance. Annual reviews, updated inventories. Now here's a pro tip. Rehearse a lawsuit fire drill once a year. If you were attacked, are you still protected? Here's a tax reality check. Offshore does not mean off tax. Your CPA will file the FBARs, the Form 8938 every year. Privacy from creditors is not secrecy from the IRS. Anybody pitching secret Swiss account is selling you a Netflix thriller, not a legal plan. Here's a maintenance tip. Run that annual fire drill. We'll pretend you've just been sued, metaphorically freeze your account for 48 hours, and document the response time. Clients call it stressful. We call it Tuesday. Now here's some honorable mentions worth a look. Luxembourg, it's a AAA credit rating and strict banking secrecy. It's great for euro-denominated funds. The Cook Islands Bank, excellent for LLCs, built in this tiny domestic banking sector, means we use it more for corporate shells than large cash balances. Next, Puerto Rico. Now it's outside the U.S. customs territory, but it's still under federal court's jurisdiction. For example, a Florida repatriation order lands on your banker's desk in Spanish by Tuesday. Next, Panama. famous for the Panama Papers. Now, when you set up a Panama account, you actually have to go there physically, unlike the other banks we talked about, which you can open remotely. Now, remember that spectator country I teased about at the start? It's actually Liechtenstein. When paired with the Cook Islands Trust, plaintiffs see two sovereign walls, one in the Pacific and one in the Alps. 99% walk away, and the rare 1% that still go after it burn 7 figures litigating and still leave empty-handed. And that's how you turn a courtroom bully into a bystander. So I'll go ahead and close with this. If today's deep dive saved you from parking your fortune in the wrong zip code, hit like so YouTube can show this to more entrepreneurs. Subscribe for weekly strategies that keep you lawsuit-proof and sleep rich. And when you're ready for your personal fortress, you can feel free to visit us at assetprotectionplanners.com. Now let's build it before somebody else builds a case against you. I'm the business guy, the CEO of the Lawyers Limited Law Firm and Asset Protection Planners. Until next time, keep your money yours.